It's Tuesday and you're watching FreightWaves Now. I'm your host Anthony Smith, and Michael Vincent is back with us today with a shipper update. But first, we're going to go to Zach Strickland with a carrier update brought to you by PowerFleet. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, and welcome to your carrier update presented by PowerFleet. I'm Zach Strickland. So, looking at our tender rejection index, after falling for the last part of last week, we're now bouncing back up over 26%, 26.45% to be specific for today. And then tender volumes coming down a little bit. So this means that carriers are actually accepting more of their freight with volumes really not going any higher or much lower. So that means that capacity is getting tighter in a lot of areas of the country right now. It's not getting significantly tighter by any means. We know we did dip down below 26% just briefly, so a 0.5% climb, not anything to really get super excited about. That big increase towards the beginning of the month, however, was a pretty big unexpected rise. But right now we're kind of middling around where, right before the holiday, we should start to see these tender rejections start to really increase here over the next few days, though, because we are going to see a lot of that supply side stuff, as we mentioned last week, really start to take place as carriers are now bound around their little markets or their areas where they're trying to get home, and that way they're able to be controlled more consistently. That's going to reduce capacity across the country. Specifically, let's look at some of these markets and see where that capacity is already starting to fall or tighten, contract. You can see a lot of markets right now. Weighted rejection index starting to contract in a lot of markets, or I should say expand in a lot of markets. As we see a lot of green here, that means that the weighted rejection index is increasing, combination of tender rejection, weekly change, and market share value. So it's going to give a lot more weight to the markets with a lot higher volume for every percent increase in that tender rejection index. Right now, Joplin, Missouri leading the way, 2.7% increase day over day out of Joplin, Missouri. So if you are a carrier operating in the middle of the country tends to get really neglected at times like this, where we see tender rejection rates expand in some of these larger markets. Areas like Joplin, Kansas City, Tulsa, Springfield, all these little areas in the middle of the country don't get as much coverage as they would during softer times. So if you are a carrier and you are contemplating going into the middle part of the country, know that you probably will see a lot more spot market activity and some of the best rates in the country right now if you are willing to go in there and start covering some of that freight. But the Atlanta market showing back up after being a very, almost a softer, large market through the majority of the fall thus far. Starting to show up here on our weighted rejection index along with the Dallas market, indicating that we are starting to see a little bit more tightening as volumes also are starting to increase a little bit. Around the rest of the country, Northeast right now, Houston and also Elizabeth, New Jersey, two of the softer or the more contracting markets in the country. So if you are a carrier, don't expect to get the same level of activity this week that you did last week on the spot market out of those two areas. Diving a little deeper into the Atlanta market, we see our outbound tender rejection index in blue there. You can see it's sort of jumping up. We're not breaking any boundaries here. We haven't broken through that high level threshold. We're still hovering right around 23.25%, just up slightly from 23% last week. We have been here before in early October, but we do see a little bit of an upward trend, and there appears to be a floor underneath it right now. A lot of rejection rates still starting to climb up, and you see the outbound tender volume index for Atlanta also increasing, indicating we're seeing a little bit more pressure from those outbound volume requests. Looking at the Atlanta market itself in all these lanes, every single lane day over day showing a tender rejection rate increase. And I should say every single of the larger lanes that we do see here. So these are about any lane that has 75 loads or more per week we can show here in Sonar. Every single one of them in green, every single one of them increasing. The biggest or the tightest lane right now going to Dallas. Let's check out Dallas real fast. We can see that our head haul index is actually kind of falling. Near term is kind of picking up a little bit. Tender rejection rates right around 20%. Not a terrible market to go into right now, but we aren't seeing any significant tightness. This market has been softening since the summer months, since the warmer area. So I can see why they're rejecting a little bit more of that freight. And that'll do it for today's carrier update.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.
Good Tuesday morning. This is your shipper update. I'm Michael Vincent. Let's jump into it. Looking at our outbound tender volume index across the United States, we can see that really since October, we've been bouncing along that 1,500, mid 1,500. Little spike there last week, actually coming up above 1,600, and then back down and fluctuating at about 15,680, right around that mark that we've been through last October. Much higher than last year, obviously. And as we get further into the holiday season, we expect those volumes to continue to rise, probably hit above those 1,600 mark again as we move forward. If we look at the outbound tender rejects, a bump up since the beginning of the week. Last week we had that way up above 27%, dropped down a little bit, and now it is starting to pick up a little bit. We imagine that will stay around between 26 and a half for a little while, and then start to pick up as we get into that holiday season, as we see many carriers many drivers want to get home for the holidays, and volumes start to pick up as we get into the holiday season further. Moving on, van outbound tender reject index is at 25.8. The reefer is at 46.62. Both of those took a little dip at the end of the week, and now both are seeing slight increases as we move into this week, and certainly will continue to rise as we move on through this season. Moving forward, our reefer outbound tender rejects versus the van. The reefer in the blue and the van in the green. Again, you can see the van has been pretty steady through August, bouncing around that 25, 26 mark, 25 and a half mark. We expect that to jump up above 26 as we move into the season a little bit further. And of course, reefer on the rise again. As we move forward, let's look into our most volatile markets. I got the largest markets up here: Ontario, California, Elizabeth, New Jersey, et cetera. Look at what's going on in these markets. Now, this is the volatility index. Each market has its own volatility index where it's expected to rise and fall on their volumes, on their head haul index, on their tender rejections, which is normal. This gauges what is outside the norm. In the major markets, you see in the volume here in the middle, Ontario, a moderate decrease. The rest of these larger markets showing about even, 4% up, 2% down, et cetera, but not outside their normal fluctuations, which is causing outbound tender reject volatility in these particular markets to be fairly steady. If we move on and look at our most volatile reject volatility markets, or those that are seeing large fluctuations in capacity, the markets to look out for if you're a shipper in these markets: Tucson, you got Joplin, Missouri, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Phoenix, even Austin, Texas has a moderate decrease, but you have strong to moderate increases in reject volatility: Tucson, Rapid City, Bristol, Joplin, Tulsa, Reno, for example. Moving on into the head haul volatility, these are the markets that you need to look in the short term, as their head haul, meaning the outbound versus the inbound, is increasing outside the norm. Strong increases in those, meaning capacity is starting to tighten. And as we see volumes go up through this week, you'll see rejections and then pressure on the spot market. What you're looking at is Seattle with a strong increase, up 33.38%. Columbus, Ohio, 31.58%. These are their head haul, outbound versus inbound. Fort Wayne also coming in at 19.4%. Jefferson City, Green Bay, Albany, and again, Charlotte and San Antonio also up quite high. If we look at a map real quick of the van outbound tender rejects versus the van volume index, you can see the effects of the different markets. The middle of the country, high rejections over here in eastern Pennsylvania or western Pennsylvania as well. That'll do it for your shipper update. I'm Mike Vincent.
And that's going to wrap it up for this Tuesday edition of FreightWaves Now. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, you can check out all of our content on all your favorite streaming platforms, including Apple TV. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.